Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon, viewing public. Good afternoon to colleagues and to the Nature Foundation, and also to Ms. Viola Ponteflet of the Young Legal. I hereby reopen this meeting. Before the break, we had an extensive presentation brought by Ms. Hickerson herself, along with the first round of questions. And moving forward, we'll have the second brief round of questions posed to the Nature Foundation. And I start off with the Honorable MP Westcott Williams. Ms. Westcott Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and a good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, at the beginning, I mentioned, sort of rhetorically asked, or suggested that we need to decide how we bring all that we've heard together and how, how we start somewhere in moving the things forward that need to be moved forward. That was not so much a question towards the Nature Foundation, but rather a comment, especially meant for this committee, because I think that's important for this committee to do in terms of brainstorming further on all that we have heard and read and decide now what do we do as a committee in preparation for the Parliament's decision, whatever we think that decision or those decisions should be. And I am even more convinced how urgent this is for the Parliament and the committee when I hear Ms. Ponteflet mention what she is confronted with just to deal with the matter of Little Key, if you please. And Little Key was designated nearly 2 years ago by the government. Yet today, given the conflicting nature of some of the legislation that we have, we're still trying to take out the, or tweak it in order to make the legislation possible to do all other things as well. So we really need to get to the point of, okay, many of my colleagues and I as well have asked about priorities. It has been given. We have been told what is required, what was required years ago, what's required today, tomorrow, etc. So as a committee, we really need to do that. We need to take all of the information and the presentations and kind of decide how do we bring it all together. In that context, the budgeting is very important, and hence my question or a follow-up question is, because there is a new SLA due, and that should have gone into effect the 1st of January 2025. Is the kickback or the delay just administratively? Everybody has to give their input, etc. I think that's important for us to know. Also looking at potential amendments to the government budget come in, as the government has told us when they first presented the budget 2025, to expect, based on priorities, some amendments to the budget. So I would like to know about the SLA, because then that would underpin whatever further discussions pertaining to the finances. As I mentioned, this issue of the conflicting nature. We have a similar issue with respect to the nature policy plan, which should be submitted to the Parliament. What is actually required? That's sort of an open question as well. What is required of Parliament, since it basically says the approval of Parliament for the nature plan. So, and we have sort of been looking at that. Okay, so what is the approval of Parliament? What does it mean, since the law states it should come to Parliament for its approval? So that's another area where we're like, okay, where do we go with it, sort of? So I mentioned the issue of the SLA. I am interested in that. Another question, the Monkey Project, and I hear you very clearly in terms of why and where you're at. And I nearly want to see, in response to that, only on St. Martin. only on St. Martin when an issue like this, with such importance for this country, are we faced with the kind of literal threats for those persons who are looking at assisting the community of St. Martin. So I honestly nearly want to say only on St. Martin. But yeah, so that's, but actually my question had to do with the fact of, so does the budget specifically for dealing with the invasive species, does that continue on a yearly basis? I know it started with an amendment to the budget a couple of years ago. So is that in addition to your SLA agreement and the payment thereof? Does, is that all? Does that continue separately, that you get those funds? And then, given what we have heard in terms of your involvement and what triggers that involvement or not, do you have any update from your perspective? And I say this not wanting to put you on the spot. The Little Bay Pond. The Little Bay Pond. Quite a while ago, maybe could have been like late 2023, early 2024, I asked about apparently a project destined for that area. And my question at the time had to do, what about the material that was put there closer to the beach? So I'm looking at the Bel Air Beach, sort of. And I was told at the time, here in a meeting of Parliament, that was to be removed the next week. End of quote. And so it is still there. And now I see some type of activity kind of going on into the Little Bay Pond. Is that... I wish it would be to clean it, because behind those mangroves and other trees there, it's a mess. For those who have been there to try to help to clean up, it's a mess behind what, so where we cannot see easily. And so I'm just wondering, do you maybe, from your perspective, picked up anything there that could tell me? Of course, I can and I will ask the minister. The only thing is that process is sort of lengthy, to just get like quick answers. Okay, just let me know, like everyone else is asking. I'm just wondering what's going on and what to expect. So yeah, but Mr. Chairman, that's it actually. But my focus in this finalization for me is how this committee needs to decide how we're going to bring it all together and what are the steps that we're going to be taking given all that we have heard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP. Before allowing Ms. Higginson to answer those questions, I would like to just get the questions as well from the following speakers: MP Iran, MP De Wever. MP Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, some brief questions, maybe even suggestions. Ms. Higginson mentioned, let's say, funding. I think the main issue here for the Nature Foundation over the last few years has been and will continue to be funding. And like the former prior speaker mentioned, I'm very interested in seeing what the SLA looks like, and if this is going to be incorporated in the budget amendment that's to come later this year. Regarding funding, you also mentioned, let's say, we don't have, let's say, a park where you can generate funds. On the budget, 2025, it was already, I think, 2024 amendment also. There's about 10 million to purchase the plants property between Belvedere and Rice Hill. So that whole stretch of property there, which is a significant piece of property, but also has some historical and naturistic value. I believe, and when we were there, we also discussed having a sort of a park in that project. So whatever project the government decides to go with, make sure have a park in there. So I would suggest that you look into having a discussion with the Minister of Vromi on that purchase and what the possibilities would be to be able to zone a particular part of it for any project that could potentially generate revenue for you. Also, has there been any research done on the ponds that we have here? Someone told me, I actually went to visit one location. They're like, yeah, do you know we have like thousands of turtles in the pond? I was like, thousands? And then I went and she threw some bread and yeah, hundreds of turtles came out. So is there any research showing how many turtles we have there in these ponds? And are we going to consider it also invasive species, I'm assuming, right? So could it be a suggestion in the, seeing that we don't have a agricultural department, that we use the Nature Foundation to basically give advice on the importance of bringing in of animals. So then we charge a fee on every advice or whatever, and that money then goes to Nature Foundation, because I think we're going to continue discussing invasive species, but if we don't have a measure in place that says, hey, you can't bring in this particular animal, but not even animals. We also, for example, when I go to other countries, I can't just buy a plant off of Amazon and bring it in, because it could disrupt our local fauna, local plants, etc. So is it an idea, in the absence of an agricultural department, at least for a temporary phase, that we use the Nature Foundation, they get paid per advice or per item coming in or whatever, and I'll leave the ministry decide. But then we have you now protecting us from all these invasive species, and we actually know what's coming in, because then you'll keep a database of the requests coming in and what actually came in. So is that a suggestion? Is that something that you can see yourself in? Thank you.
Thank you, MP Irian. MP De Wever, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going over my notes again, and I just forgot one question, because one of the reasons that I was tying in the different ways to collaborate with, that Nature Foundation can collaborate with various ministries, was exactly for this point of a question asked by someone within our community. And even though I know that the Ministry of ASA does testing, water testing of different areas, they also give sometimes their recommendations about the water quality in Phillipsburg or in the Great Bay area specifically. But the question was, what is Nature Foundation's role in regards to testing, and whether or not they're actively testing the pond, like, Simpson Bay, the different ponds that we have. But the question was specifically surrounding if there was any testing on the Great Bay, on the salt pond, and the freshwater pond, which is the outlet that comes into Great Bay Beach. So that was exactly what the question is, but I'm sure it's applicable for various areas on the island within the lagoon and different beaches. But the specific was, again, Great Bay Salt Pond, Fresh Pond, going out into Great Bay Beach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I see that MP Roseberg would like to chime in. MP Roseberg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, two of my questions were, I think, missed, seeing maybe the amount of questions I asked. And one was in regard to the crowdfunding, if that has been an idea that the Nature Foundation has thought of, especially seeing that locally and also internationally, there are a lot of people that are passionate about nature and inspired by nature. So maybe as a temporary solution, that can be an idea as well. So I would like to get a reaction on that through you, Mr. Chair, if the Nature Foundation looked at that. And also, seeing that we all know that funding is an issue, I brought forward several projects that on European level can be looked into, seeing that also on the European level funding was already received. If the Nature Foundation is interested in receiving the list that I referred to, or maybe those options were already explored and it's not needed. So just to think outside the box. Those are the two questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. I now look at Ms. Hickerson for her response.
Thank you very much, and thank you all so much for your questions. First, since I did miss the questions of MP Roseberg earlier, I'd like to address those quickly. Crowdfunding is not something that we have looked into. It's quite a nice idea, and particularly because St. Martin is such a unique island where we're part of the SSS and the smaller brand of islands, but we are a CAS island, so that puts us in a unique situation for capacity and funding. And we are very interested in receiving the list of funding opportunities because several of them I had not heard of before. Going back now to the first questions were from MP Westcott Williams. Regarding the delay in the SLA, I think that from my understanding, this is purely administrative delay, and in large part because I asked for an increase of the funding. We have had the standard SLA for some time now. Not only did we ask for an increase in funding to support the capacity that we have gotten used to with Project Carina, but we also asked for the time period of the SLA to be extended. Instead of having to renew every 3 years, we asked for a 5-year time period on the service level agreement to address these administrative issues when it does come up. The next question was kind of in general regarding the nature policy plan. While I'm not privy to the role that Parliament plays in the approval of the nature policy plan, I can say that the plan was written with direct impacts from international conservation strategies and goals. And the work that was done on Project Carina has helped to accomplish a lot of the outstanding targets of that plan. And it aligns very well with what we should be aiming for in our island and our region. So the Nature Foundation supports the current nature policy plan and has been developing our conservation strategies and planning based off of it. Regarding the invasive species project budget, that has been incorporated into our service level agreement. So that is now part of the standard funding that we receive, and it is part of the deliverables and the reporting tasks of the service level agreement. So we anticipate that that will continue with the renewal of the next SLA. And finally, questions regarding the Little Bay Pond. From the Nature Foundation side, I don't have any update regarding any issued or ongoing works in the area. I can confirm the materials on the beach are definitely still there. So if they were to be removed, that has not been met. And if any development would be to enter the area or to be planned for the area, we would like to be brought in regarding advice. The Little Bay Pond is a really significant area, not only because most of St. Martin's ponds have now been lost due to development, but also because it's an important birding area. It is the hunting ground for the last nesting brown pelican troop that we have on the island, which of course is our national bird. They nest on Fort Amsterdam and then travel down into Little Bay Pond for hunting. So that is quite significant. And building of a high rise in between those two areas, we don't know how that would impact the nesting colony. There was activity, and also something to keep in mind if you're looking into development at Little Bay, that is one of the areas that is going to be most impacted by sea level rise and flooding. It is already severely impacted by flooding anytime we have those large storms come through, and something to keep in mind if you're investing millions of dollars in a business in the area. There was activity there this week that the Nature Foundation went out, and because we're not an enforcement agency, we go and the first thing we ask is, are you from Vromi? Are you from a developer? And then we ask, follow up, do you have a civil works permit? And the activity that was happening alongside the road the last week we were there, we were told was from the Ministry of Vromi. It was planned works regarding drainage in the area. Because we're not an enforcement agency, we can just take that as fact, and that's what we know about what was happening there. The next set of questions were from MP Irion. Since, as you said, funding is the main issue, and it's something that, in particular, because of our request for an increase in our service level agreement, should be expected to come up during the amendment, because I believe the request for amendment was made maybe mid-October of 2024, so we would not have made the deadline for the standard budget. I was unaware of the money allocated for the property purchase, so that is definitely something that we will be looking into. I'm not sure, perhaps that area is designated as more of a park like what we have nearby Amelia Wilson, that's just a park for the public, but we will definitely look into it and see if there is an opportunity, not only for sustainable financing there, but also just for preserving a nature area for the residents of St. Martin as well. Slider turtles in the ponds are an issue that we are aware of. They're a non-native but naturalized species, and they're extremely prolific. I have not done, the Nature Foundation hasn't done any population study there just because of the nature of doing such. It would be quite involved study to accomplish. But what we have done is a lot of in-depth work regarding the mangroves in those areas. We did a very in-depth mangrove analysis of the ponds, or in the ponds and the lagoon. But the last full assessment of the ponds themselves was done in 1995 by Ecovision, that previous report that I mentioned. And that is something that, again, I think looking into the rehabilitation of pond areas, particularly Great Salt Pond, would be a good use of government capacity, because in particular, Great Salt Pond should be seen as a cultural and heritage site and valued for its role in St. Martin. The last question, I think, from MP Ariana, if I haven't missed anything, was the advice for Agriculture Department. Currently, the Nature Foundation does give advice to members of the Ministry of TIAT regarding import and export of animals when they request it. It's kind of at their discretion, much like our previous advice to the ministry before our integration to the Civil Works permit. So that is something we would definitely be willing to and interested in continuing, particularly if Government St. Martin is going to be addressing the issue of importing and exporting non-native species. You mentioned the restrictions on import or bringing in plants if you're in a different country. That is, for example, the Corralita vine is an invasive plant species, and it has wreaked havoc on the environment in St. Eustatius. So things like that are something that should be addressed at an import and export level. Already, our legislation and policies regarding the import and export of plants and animals are very limited. So that is something that puts us at risk of being an animal trafficking area as well, because our legislation is limited. So that just puts us as a hotspot for activities like that. Incorporating somebody that is giving advice regarding those activities, but could also maybe function as a biosecurity officer that supports the Customs, Coast Guard, and Immigration or enforcement agencies regarding ships and planes coming in and out of St. Martin is something that not only the Nature Foundation wants, but our neighboring islands would also very much appreciate. Islands like Saba and Statia that have less of an invasive species population are currently most at risk because of St. Martin. So the native iguanas in Statia and Saba can be outcompeted by the green iguanas in St. Martin, just like our native iguanas were. And we are the highest risk factor for our neighboring islands. So having somebody that is focused on biosecurity, maybe in part funded by the Ministry of Justice, could really help the impact on our region as well, and not only just for St. Martin. And then finally, from MP DeWeaver, we had questions about water quality testing. In the original service level agreement with the Government St. Martin, water quality testing was something that was highlighted as an activity for the Nature Foundation. Right now, in our resources, we have to outsource the actual testing of the water samples. So we use the SLS Environmental Lab, and the cost is quite high. So we have limited the water quality samples by our budget. to a certain number each year. So we're not doing regular testing to keep like a data track of how the water quality is in the bays, ponds, or lagoon area. And that is a gap of not only something that should be provided by your management organization, but also a data knowledge gap for us in the long term. We do not know if it's getting worse or if it's staying still. And that's something that should be addressed. But until we have either more equipment and resources to do this in-house, what we currently use those funds for is when somebody calls and tells us that someone's dumping sewage in an area. If I can only do 8 water quality samples a year, we save those. And when we get a call from someone at the lagoon that says, I can literally see toilet paper floating here, can you please come test the water? That's what we save those tests for. And then we submit those results to try to make sure that wastewater treatment plants are operating as they're supposed to. I think that those were all the questions, but feel free to remind me if I forgot.
I look at